What would make a superpower cross the ocean to enter a war that wasn't theirs? In 1917, the United States was on the other side of the Atlantic, watching from afar as Europe was torn apart by destruction. But one message, a single coded letter, was enough to turn neutrality into action, distance into involvement, and hesitation into war. That message became known as the Zimmermann Telegram, a secret diplomatic letter that, once intercepted and revealed, changed the course of World War I. It was written far from the battlefields, without a drop of blood, yet powerful enough to drag millions into death. It was a cold, calculated proposal sent by one of the most powerful men in the German Empire. But when it fell into the wrong, or perhaps right, hands, it turned into a global scandal. In a time when communication relied on cables, codes, and trust between embassies, this letter proved that sometimes words can be deadlier than bullets. In this episode of Lost Letters, you'll discover the story of a telegram that was never meant to be read, and that, even unintentionally, pushed the United States into World War I, forever changing the fate of the 20th century. By 1917, World War I was in its third year. Trenches in Europe marked the scene of a bloody, stagnant conflict. On one side, the Central Powers, led by Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. On the other, the Triple Entente, with France, the United Kingdom, Russia, and their allies. Millions had already died, and victory seemed distant for both sides. The United States, though economically powerful, still remained neutral. President Woodrow Wilson had been re-elected with the slogan, "He kept us out of war," and most Americans saw no reason to get involved in a European conflict. But beneath this distant stance, invisible tension was building. American ships had been attacked by German submarines in the Atlantic. U.S. companies were financing European allies, and the press was beginning to question how long the country could remain on the sidelines. War, even across the ocean, felt increasingly close. On the German side, the situation was desperate. The British naval blockade was strangling its trade routes, and U.S. entry into the war would be a strategic disaster. So Berlin decided to take an extreme risk, to try opening a new front of conflict inside the American continent itself. It was a bold and desperate move, and for that they would need an unlikely ally, Mexico. On January 16, 1917, the German Empire's foreign minister, Arthur Zimmermann, drafted a coded telegram and sent it to the German ambassador in Mexico, Heinrich von Eckart. Its content was bold, almost unbelievable. Germany proposed a secret military alliance with Mexico. If the United States entered the war, Mexico should attack them. In return, Berlin promised military and financial support, and the recovery of territories lost decades earlier: Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. It was a clear attempt to open a new front of war in the Western Hemisphere, to distract the United States and prevent its intervention in Europe. The idea was simple. If the Americans were busy fighting at home, they wouldn't be able to send troops to France or support their European allies. But there was a problem. The telegram had to cross the Atlantic and reach Mexico safely. And, ironically, Germany depended on communication routes controlled by the British themselves. The telegram ended up being transmitted through a diplomatic cable that passed through London. Zimmermann trusted the cipher used was unbreakable. He believed that even if intercepted, no one would be able to understand the message. But this was a fatal mistake. Because across the English Channel, the British were more watchful and more skilled than he imagined. Just days after the telegram was sent, it was intercepted by one of the most secret and efficient British intelligence operations of the war, Room 40. Hidden within the British Admiralty, this was where a team of cryptographers worked day and night decoding German messages. And it was here that the Zimmermann telegram landed, masked in layers of complex code. At first, the British hesitated. They had the message's content but faced a dilemma. If they revealed it right away, the Germans would realize their code had been cracked and would change all their communications. It was too great a risk. but the letter's contents were too explosive to ignore. So the British decided to wait. They acted with strategic patience. They obtained a second copy of the telegram through an alternative channel and forged a story that it had been intercepted in Mexico. This way, they protected their secret while preparing the ground to expose the scandal to the world. On February 24, 1917, the British government handed the telegram to the American ambassador in London. When the content reached President Woodrow Wilson, the reaction was one of shock and disbelief. The US government verified the message's authenticity, and on March 1st, the telegram was published in American newspapers. The public response was immediate. A sense of betrayal swept across the country. The mere idea that Germany was encouraging an attack on American soil and even promising land in return was seen as a direct affront. The publication of the telegram was like a political bomb in the United States. Until then, public opinion had been divided. Many Americans, especially those of German or Irish descent, viewed the war in Europe as a distant conflict. But after reading Arthur Zimmerman's words in the press, everything changed. Outrage was instant. Nationalist sentiment surged. Members of Congress demanded action. Citizens, once indifferent, began enlisting voluntarily. It was confirmation that Germany was not only violating American neutrality at sea, sinking ships with civilians aboard, but also conspiring to attack the country by land. In a rare moment of national unity, Democrats and Republicans began pressuring President Wilson to act. Until then reluctant, he realized there was no more room for neutrality. The telegram, combined with the constant attacks by German submarines, had made entering the war inevitable. On April 2, 1917, Wilson addressed Congress. He asked for a formal declaration of war against Germany. In his words, the United States must make the world safe for democracy. 4 days later, Congress approved the declaration. The war was now America's as well. Thousands of soldiers would cross the Atlantic in the following months. The U.S. entry into the conflict would not only change the course of World War I, which would end just over a year later, but also redefine America's role as a global power. All of this because of a single letter that was never meant to be read. The revelation of the Zimmerman telegram was one of the most decisive moments of World War I, not because it won a battle, but because it shaped the war's course beyond the battlefield. America's entry accelerated the German Empire's collapse, boosted Allied morale, and by the war's end reshaped the global balance of power. The U.S. emerged not just as a victor, but as a central player in the New World Order. For Germany, the letter was a strategic disaster. Arthur Zimmerman, under pressure from the press and the international community, publicly confirmed the message's authenticity, a mistake that only fueled American outrage. He believed admitting authorship might seem bold or diplomatic, but his honesty only reinforced the narrative of threat and betrayal. Mexico, on the other hand, rejected the German proposal. The country, weakened by internal conflict and in no condition to face the U.S. militarily, saw the offer as an invitation to geopolitical suicide. The Mexican government simply ignored the letter. The Zimmerman telegram is still studied today as an example of how communication, a single message, can alter the course of history. It shows the power of words in times of war, the weight of a poorly calculated diplomatic move, and the vital importance of information and espionage. It was a mistake that cost the German Empire dearly and gave the United States the final push to become a world power.